back to you. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Okay. Sounds good. Okay. Let's move on with the data step processing. We talked a little bit about it, and I'm going to talk about it again today because I want to go a little bit deeper into it and draw some differences uh, into how it works when you're reading an input file versus reading a SAS data set. There's a slight difference in how that works. And we didn't really take a look at what happens when I read something, what happens in the PDV, what happens in the input buffer, right? So we didn't look at it. So we look at that today. Okay. So in we talked about it last week. SAS data set is data step has two phases. One is the compilation phase and one is the execution phase. In compilation phase, SAS is just looking for any syntax errors, and if it finds a syntax error, it's going to stop processing. After the compilation phase ends, then the execution phase starts. These two phases don't occur together. In the execution phase, SAS reads one observation at a time. It runs through all the steps in the data step, and then it goes back to the top. And if it finds the second observation, then it runs through the step again until there are no more observations to process. It just repeats that. Okay, so this is what we talked about in terms of reading an input file last time. The input file is read into an input buffer, and the input from there it's put into the PDV one record at a time. It's processed and then it goes to the output dataset. So the PDV is again a memory location that SAS uses to step through your data step, process the variables, store the values for that one observation, and write it up. So the PDV has two automatic variables that it uses to keep track of the observation number and whether there is any error in processing that particular observation. So those are underscore n underscore and underscore error underscore. Like I said, underscore n underscore is to keep track of the observation that's being processed, and underscore error underscore is a binary value 0 or 1, and it's set to 1 when there's a data error, when a data error has occurred while processing that observation. And then once the compilation is done, the descriptor portion, which is what are the columns that I'm reading in the SAS data set, what's the name of the SAS data set, what are the variables, what are the attributes, meaning lengths and formats and all those things. They are all stored in the PDV. Okay. When I'm reading it from a SAS data set as opposed to an input file, I don't have this input buffer construct that comes in between. Okay. The SAS data set is directly read into the PDV one record at a time. Okay, so let's hope I didn't skip anything. Okay, let's look at this input data. So I've linked the paper that I took this example from. So when I post it, you can go here and you can follow this link here. And this paper is all about data step. Okay, so I created a lot of the material today that you'll be seeing, especially in the compilation phases and stuff from this paper. So if you want to learn a lot more in depth about what I'm talking about today, go to this paper and read through it. Okay. Okay. So let's take a look at this input data. Okay. We have a name. I think this is probably height and this is probably weight. Okay. And this is a simple program to read in this data. Okay. So here you have in file referring to this file wherever it's stored. Input 1 through 7, this is the column format input. I'm saying dollar so that we are reading in character variable. Then height, so 8 is being skipped, 9 and 10 are height, so 9 to 10 is height. And then weight is 12, 13, and 14, so 12 to 14. And then new variable is being calculated called BMI based on the data that we are reading. And there's an output statement, we'll talk about that output statement, and then there's a run statement. Okay, so we've seen all this stuff before in terms of reading the data. Okay, so when just based on what we've seen here, Can anybody tell me what's going to happen when we read in the first record? It's okay. Don't be
Weight
afraid of. Go ahead. It's okay. Go
weight
ahead.
will be considered as a character value.
Correct. So we are reading a character value, but we have mentioned. So if you look at the weight, there's 12D, right?
12.
And that's. But we have said we are reading numeric values. We have not said anywhere that we are reading dollar. Okay. So when we read it in, we're trying to read it in and read in numeric, but we have provided 12D, which is character. So it's going to complain about it. It's not going to be able to store the value. So you're probably going to see a missing value. So thank you for that. Yeah. So um, it's probably going to give you some sort of error. And this is where this underscore error underscore, which we talked about, it will highlight, and underscore n underscore, it will highlight which where the error was. Okay. So let's go forward. So when we look at the input buffer, because this is coming from an external file, the input buffer is going to look like this. Okay. It's going to number it. It's going to say, okay, one, it's going to put it in boxes with index values on the boxes. Okay. And then when it comes across the input statement, which uses the input statement to read the values into the PDV. Okay. So first, when it creates the PDV, it's going to go look at the information that you've requested for. So underscore n and underscore error underscore are automatic variables. They get automatically created in the PDV. Then you have name, height, weight, which you've asked for, which comes in, and BMI, that again. So you might notice here that there is some variables with D and some variables with K. The D stands for drop and K stands for keep. So only the variables that are marked with K are going to be part of the output data set. Everything else will be dropped. This is only part of the PDV, perhaps for calculation, perhaps for showing you if there's an error and so on.
Vijay,
Yes, go ahead.
D stands for
Drop.
drop. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So the execution, again, this is from the input file point of view. When the execution starts, the automatic variables underscore n underscore and underscore error underscore are initialized to 1 and 0 respectively, because 1 means I'm going to read the first record, 0 means there is no data error. Okay, that's at this point there's no data error. And then the ones which are not automatic, right, the ones that you are creating are set to missing values. Okay, so there's some exceptions to this. We'll talk about a couple of them, or one perhaps later today. But this is the general. You need to know the general rule, not the exception. Okay, so the automatic variables are set to missing, and then the first line of data is read into the input buffer. The input statement, so we saw it first goes into the input buffer, where how it has the indexes and stuff like that for each character column or each column of data. And then the input statement is used to read the values from the input buffer and put them into the PDV in the form of columns. And when the output statement is encountered, if you recollect, we had a specific explicit output statement in that particular program. If there is not one, then run is considered as the output statement. When that's encountered, all the values from the PDV which are not marked as D are written to the output data set. Okay, so then this is the first record's been processed. Then at the end of it, it goes back to the top of the data step. Okay, so and then it performs the same steps for the next observation. That is, the values of the variables first in PDV are reset to missing. The n is, because it's a second value, it's incremented to 2. The error is set to 0. The second line is read into the input buffer, then into the PDV, and so on. And this happens until all the records in the data step are processed. Okay, so in the example that we saw, there is an explicit output statement. Okay, this output statement right there, it tells SAS to immediately write the contents of the PDV to the output data set. If in case you didn't, if there was no explicit output, let's say this was not there, then SAS will write the contents of the PDB to the output dataset when it encounters the run statement. And run statement is actually not required in SAS. If you did not provide a run statement and SAS encounters the next data step or the next proc, it's going to consider that the end of the previous data step. So if you have an next proc, you can leave out run. Actually, technically, it will work. Not recommended, not good programming practice, but it will work. So when it encounters the run statement, then it will consider that the end of the step, end of that particular iteration, and so it will go back up and start it again. So that's the implicit output. Run is considered as the implicit output. You can also use an explicit output. So when there is an explicit output, so when you have provided an output statement like that, then the implicit output no longer applies. What does it mean? It means if I've given output in my data step, there's an output statement. Then when it goes to run, it's not going to attempt to write the data to the output data set one more time. That's what that means. Okay, and I have an example of this, an interesting one, to show you. I make some changes after the output statement to some variables, and what happens? Will it get written out to the data set or not? So we'll take a look at that in the example. Okay, so I'm going to switch here to a simple example mode.